chair of the National Republican Senatorial Committee, Senator Rick Scott. He talked with reporters about the 2022 midterm elections at an event sponsored by the Christian Science Monitor. He says the Republican Party remains in a strong position going into election season. He also answers questions about recent primary elections and a gun control bill being considered by the Senate.
Looks like we're ready. Good morning. I'm Linda Feldman, Washington Bureau Chief of the Christian Science Monitor. Our guest today is Senator Rick Scott of Florida, chair of the National Republican Senatorial Committee. This is his first appearance at a Monitor breakfast, so welcome.
It's nice to be here.
Senator Scott grew up in North Kansas City, Missouri, and after a stint in the Navy, graduated from the University of Missouri, Kansas City, then law school at Southern Methodist University. After a stretch as CEO of a major healthcare company, he entered politics, winning 2 terms as governor of Florida by this much, right? And then beating...
As compared to Dr. Oz, it was a landslide.
Right, yeah. And then beating Senator Bill Nelson in 2018 for a seat in the Senate. Now, as NRSC chair, he has the fun assignment of helping the Republicans take control of the Senate in a cycle that should be good for his party. Again, welcome.
Should be, right?
Should be. Now for the ground rules. We are on the record. Please, no live blogging or tweeting. In short, no filing of any kind while the breakfast is underway. There's no embargo once the session ends at 8:30 this morning. We will email pictures and a rough transcript from this breakfast to all reporters here shortly after the breakfast ends. As you know, if you'd like to ask a question, please wave at me somehow, and I will call on as many of you as time permits. Now, Chairman Scott, if you'd like to make brief opening remarks, the floor is yours.
Sure. One, thanks for the opportunity to be here. So I sort of have 3 jobs right now. First, let me give you quickly my background. I'm very fortunate. I was born to a single mom. I was born in Illinois, grew up in public housing. My mom told me, thank God you live in the United States of America because you can be anything, and I believed her. I've had a variety of careers. I was served in the Navy as a radarman, which meant I swabbed the decks a lot and cleaned the latrines. I was at the tail end of the Vietnam War. I did not go to Vietnam. I was stationed on the East Coast. Then I finished law school. I was a transaction lawyer for 9 years. I always wanted to be in business, so I finally figured that out. I bought my first business was a donut shop when I got out of the Navy, so my mom could have a job. But after I was a lawyer, I started a hospital company and eventually built the largest hospital company in the country. Then I did a variety of manufacturing companies. So if you have a Corvette, I made the outer body for the Corvette. If you have a Toyota Tacoma, I made your truck bed. If you have a tractor, I probably made your industrial chain. So I did a variety of things like that. Then I ran for governor. I'd never run for office before in 2010. To the shock of everybody, we were able to win the primary and the general. In the primary, I didn't have any endorsements. I ran on a jobs platform. And then we served 8 years as governor. What probably I'm most proud of as governor is we added 1.7 million jobs. We balanced the budget. We paid off a third of the state debt. And we went from a state that was losing people and jobs to a state that was one of the leading states. I always wanted to beat Rick Perry in Texas. I ran for the Senate. Everybody told me we couldn't win that either. We were able to win. I've been up here 3.5 years as the head of the Senatorial Committee. As you know, we have 21 seats up on our side, 14 on theirs. We're raising money. We have good candidates. As you know, the Biden approval numbers are pretty bad. So I think we have every opportunity to believe we can get a majority. I think the race will probably come down to making sure we can keep our seats in Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and North Carolina, then pick up Georgia, Nevada, New Hampshire, and Arizona. But we have opportunities in other states, Colorado, state of Washington, some other states, Connecticut. If our candidates do a good job, we raise our money, I think we have a big opportunity. I also, separate from that, completely on my own, not part of the NRSC, I put out a plan to rescue the country. And we just updated it. It's got 12 points. And my goal is to create a conversation about where this country ought to go, to go back to the type of country I grew up in where everything was doable. It's great to be here.
All right, well, thank you. So I'll start with a few questions, and then we'll move to reporters around the room. So I have to ask you, have the January 6th hearings helped your cause as NRSC chair, or hurt it in some way, or is it a wash?
I think it's irrelevant. It's reality TV.
Irrelevant?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. I think. You mean these hearings that they're having? These. Nobody's watching.
Nobody's watching? You had 20 million watching the first night.
I've not gotten asked by anybody in my state about it. I think. This is just. It was not a normally organized committee, and it's just trying to attack Trump. So I think it's irrelevant.
Okay. So what's your latest thinking about how you'll do in November?
I think we have every reason to believe we can win 54 seats. But here's the deal. It comes down to this. Our candidates have to run good races. We have to raise our money. We have to, unfortunately for the country, Biden's doing a horrible job, which is actually helping us, but bad for the country. I think the election is going to be about inflation, gas prices, baby formula shortages, supply chain problems, critical race theory, defunding the police. But I think most of it is going to be about inflation. When I was governor, I always thought about the job as three things most important. Number one is your livelihood. Number two, your kids' education. Number three, safety. So in this case, it's inflation, gas prices, shortages, critical race theory, and defunding the police. I think generally elections fit into those three categories. Now, you have to run a good race. You have to go show up, and so I was able to win the Hispanic vote, and part of it is that I showed up. Hispanics are coming our way because they've figured out that the Democrat agenda is not good for them, and so as long as Republicans explain that we care about your faith, your job, your kids' education, and you being safe, I think Hispanics are going to continue to vote with us.
Okay. So one more about...
But who knows, right? We all know November 8th.
So one more on January 6th. Do you consider Joe Biden the legitimately elected president of the United States?
Yes. Yep. Absolutely.
Okay. And when's the last time you saw Donald Trump?
Probably 6 or 8 weeks ago.
Okay.
So I talked to him.
How often do you talk to him?
Every 2 to 3 weeks.
Really?
Yeah. So I talk to him every 2 or 3 weeks. He's interested in the Senate races. Mm-hmm. He's tried to be helpful. As you know, he's endorsing a lot of races.
Sure.
So my goal is that he continues to be helpful. He's been helpful on on the fundraising at the NRSC. So yeah.
Mm-hmm. So what else do you talk about? You just talk about how the races are going, or?
Most of them. It's mostly about the races. He loves politics. Mm-hmm. It's all I'm trying to think. My wife and I had dinner with he and Melania in February.
At Mar-a-Lago.
At Mar-a-Lago, yeah. Mm-hmm. My wife doesn't talk about politics the whole time, so they talk about other stuff.
Does he muse at all about running?
I think he doesn't ask me if he should run, but he's always talking. You have to assume he's going to run. He's not suggesting he's not. Have you guys? Has he given any interviews to you guys that suggest he's not running? I look at it, he's probably running, but.
So I'm getting a little message. Could you speak up a little bit so people can hear?
Yeah, just let me know and I'll speak. I'll be glad to speak up.
Okay. All right.
Again?
Air conditioning is very loud.
Yeah. I wonder if
I'll
we
speak
can
up. Okay. Yeah.
Maybe turn off the.
I have no idea if Donald Trump's running, but I don't know. Has he suggested in the interview that he's not?
Yeah. All right. John Gizzi from Newsmax.
Thank you, Linda. Thank you, Senator, for coming. I have 2 questions. The first is a follow-up to Linda. And I'd probably ask this to any Florida Republican. Who would you prefer as a candidate for President, Donald Trump or Ron DeSantis?
Oh, I don't know. The voters are going to decide.
You don't have a preference between the two of them? Okay.
Way off.
Great. My other question for you is, you mentioned the state of Connecticut, which is my home state and which has not elected a Republican senator since 1976. Could you offer some evidence just why Senator Blumenthal might be in trouble against Ms. Maridis or any other candidate?
Yeah, I think if you look, if you first off, I think the election is going to be a referendum on Biden. Okay, so right now you don't see many candidates want to show up at a press conference with Joe Biden because his numbers are horrible. They're not good anywhere in the country, including in Connecticut. I think that I think this is the year if you want to beat a Democrat. I mean, look at so Blumenthal's already have to run ads in Connecticut. Patty Murray's running ads in already, which is, she's been up here 35 years or something. She's already running ads. They're already attacking Tiffany Smile in Washington. You look at Democrats; they know how bad this is. They see the same poll numbers I see, and this isn't a referendum on Biden, and he's in worse shape than Obama was at this time in his first term. Now, it's a race between two people. So in the end, there'll be a primary on the Republican side, so they've got to talk about the issues that people care about. It can't just be the other person's bad. You have to tell people what you're going to accomplish if you get elected. But I think we have good people running, so we'll see.
All right, Mike.
Yes.
Warren
Hi.
from CNN.
Hi. I've talked to a lot of Missouri Republicans who are concerned that Eric Greitens is not only going to win the nomination for Senate, but would actually then win the Senate seat. These are Republicans who are concerned about Eric Greitens. What is your level of concern about Eric Greitens and his ability to win the nomination and win the general election?
I'm not getting involved in any open primaries. I think Missouri will make a good choice. And I think whoever they choose is going to be a Republican senator from Missouri. There's no reason to believe we won't win Missouri. Whoever a nominee is there, we've got good people running. So we'll see. But we'll see what happens.
Is Eric Greitens the person who's running?
I'll let the voters decide. Let me give you my background. In 2010, I had no endorsements. I was completely new, and the voters. I went and explained why I should be the new governor, and I was able to sell a message. So. You've got, whether it's Eric Schmidt or Vicky Hartzler or Billy Long or Eric Greitens, one of them is going to have the best message to the voters.
Did you think that digital video that he released this week was a good idea, a good message for Republicans?
I didn't see it, but what I've heard about it, I don't believe that we ought to ever be promoting any violence.
So let me jump in on that. So you have both Eric Greitens and Herschel Walker, who both have faced serious allegations of domestic violence. Herschel Walker has actually said that he holds himself accountable for behavior toward his ex-wife. Are you concerned that these candidates hurt the party's brand?
Well, I think Georgia voters are going to make a choice. Herschel's been very honest and upfront about. His background, and the voters are they're going to make a choice. I think, in contrast, Warnock has not been upfront, and I think Warnock. If you look at Warnock's voting record, it's not what he's. Georgia is still a Republican state, and that I think Herschel's going to win because Herschel's talking about the issues that are important, and Warnock now has a track record. Like Kelly's got a track record. Take Kelly's. Kelly acted like he was a moderate, and he's voting, almost 100% with Chuck Schumer since he's been up here. I think that's not going to bode well for these candidates this year.
So personal background doesn't matter.
I think it's important. I think people want to look and see who you are, look, in these races, you're going to get attacked you're always going to get attacked for your background. I think that what's most important is tell people who you are. And be honest and upfront with who you are. And if you've made mistakes, explain what you've learned from them. So.
right. Rick Klein from ABC.
Thank you. Hi, Senator. Thanks for doing this. I've heard your name a lot in the last couple of weeks surrounding the gun legislation. A lot of people have talked about what you were able to do as governor of Florida. You've even seen the op-ed that you wrote as a senator about the ability to do gun control that doesn't infringe on gun rights. A lot of the senators involved in these negotiations, Democrats, Republicans, said they've been modeling it on what Florida was able to do. Based on what you've seen in this framework, are you prepared to support the bill that's advanced with Senator Cornyn and Senator Murphy?
No, I voted against proceeding last night because, one, we just got the text. I think the details matter. I want to review it. The process I went through after Parkland is I put together groups of people that came in a very transparent manner, and we had about, this will be off a little bit, Rick, but about 30 people came in, mental health experts, and separate group was 30 people came in, they're education experts, and 30 on law enforcement, and they gave me their ideas, and I proposed something, and I worked through the legislative process with the legislature. So, you know, I'm going to look at this. Here's my sort of, I'm not interested in taking away somebody's Second Amendment rights. I do believe in states' rights. I believe that states ought to be, you know, where most things happen, because up here, as you know, once something passes, it's very difficult to change it. At the state level, it's much easier to change things, and so I think we ought to be very cautious about doing things nationally.
So is it?
But I'm going to read it, Rick.
Sure. So yeah, your initial vote against the motion to proceed wasn't necessarily a vote on the final legislation.
No, we just got it. We just got it like I think an hour before.
But just so I understand, so is your primary concern about it the states' rights, or is there something in the?
No, I mean I just want to read it. So I just think we ought to be really careful about, you know, I'm not going to take away. I'm not going to vote to take away Second Amendment rights, and then I do believe that states ought to be, you know. Yeah. I just think we ought to get back to having states being laboratories, because we ought to have 50 laboratories, and we ought to, and what might fit for Florida, and it might, you know, the way I also look at things is some things might fit for a period of time, and then things change, and federally, this is just a big bottleneck up here.
Do you think your bill in Florida was a good bill, and is the right law still in Florida?
I thought it was right. I signed it. I believed in it. Yeah. But I think you ought to go back and, you know, always look at it and get feedback from people. I try to do that all the time. I try to do that as governor.
All right. Mara Liasson from NPR.
Hi.
Thanks for doing this, Senator. Speaking of endorsements, how valuable do you feel Trump's endorsement has been? He has kind of a mixed record, and DeSantis is not asking for his endorsement for his reelection, and is that significant? So.
I didn't know anything about the DeSantis stuff. I think if you were running right now for the U.S. Senate, I think most people would want to get his endorsement, but you wouldn't want to run your whole campaign just on that. I mean, I think that he's clearly been helpful to people, but you got to go, you know, run on the issues that are important to your state.
You said earlier that you do think that Joe Biden is the legitimately elected president. I'm assuming that means you reject Donald Trump's lie that somehow the election was stolen from him.
But here's what I'll tell you. Joe Biden's the duly elected president. I do believe when you go around the country, people have belief that they're concerned about whether we have good election laws. And so one of my I went through this as governor. You know, we're constantly trying to figure out how to improve the election laws, and whenever you did, everybody wanted to call you names, right? So in this role, what I've tried to do is, in the role of the chair of the NRC, we've defended the new election laws, I think in 5 states, and then we're doing what I did in Florida. One of the reasons why we were able to prevail in the recount in 2018 is we'd already hired something like 1,000 lawyers, and we trained 7,000 volunteers. And here's what I tell people, Maura, it's not just you have to have the right laws. You have to get involved to make sure they're enforced right. I mean, you have to go volunteer to make sure you watch and do this stuff. You know, the more there's oversight of things, people do a better job. So I tell people, if you actually want the elections to be secure, you're part of that. Go volunteer, make sure they're secure. But I know, look, I hear it. People people are worried about whether their vote's going to get diluted, and I think we all have to do everything we can to make sure that doesn't happen.
Do you think the fact that 70% of Republican voters believe something that is false is something that Republican leaders have to address?
Well, the way I'm addressing it is, because people, I get asked, right? So the way I'm addressing it is I said, here, I can tell you, this is what I did in my race in 2018 and how I tried to work hard to make sure the election was fair. This is what I've done as the chair of the NRSC. This is what I've tried to stop that Schumer, Schumer wants to get rid of voter ID. That's the craziest idea ever. He wants to mandate ballot harvesting. That's foolish. So I think what we have to do is say we want everybody to vote that has a right to vote, and we want no fraud. And that's what I'm going to keep trying to do.
Do you ever say to those people that you say you talked to so many of them that there was not any significant fraud found by all those judges who looked at all those cases? Do you ever push back against that?
Here's the way I do it. So when somebody comes to me, I say, go back and show me where it happened, right? I'll give you an example. Right after the 2020 election, I'm on Homeland Security. We had a hearing, right? And we had somebody from, I think, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Nevada come. The Trump lawyer came from Nevada. He said Trump lost by 33,000 votes. He said there's this many people voted twice, blah, blah, went through it, 130-some thousand people. We all asked for the information. We've never gotten it. Well, in contrast, was it the city council race where they went and showed that these people in Las Vegas where they didn't have a right to vote in the primary and they threw out the election in 2020? There was one there. Yeah, I think it was 2020. Yeah, was that what it was? Yeah. So what I tell people is, go show me. I've said that all along afterwards. I said, I went and I explained in 2018 what was happening in my race. I explained it to everybody. And actually, I fired the supervisor election in Broward County, and the media supported me because I explained it. And that's what I think we have to do. That's what I tell people. I said, explain it. It doesn't happen as much, but it still happens, right? I had a call last week from somebody, and that's what I tell them.
A call from who?
Oh, just voters.
Voters who believe that the election was stolen.
Well, they'll say it a couple of different ways. They'll say, "Oh, I think there was, fraud," or "Oh, I'm concerned that the next election it won't matter," right? And I say, "Okay, so here's what I'm doing. If you have a better idea," and then I tell them, "You have to be involved in your own, either do it at your precinct. You can go and monitor the election. Do it."
Do you think that Republicans will accept the results of an election that they lose? You do?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay. All right.
I'll just give you a side story. So, of course, you always think when you're running you're going to win, right? And so, I have two daughters, and my daughters, when I went through that recount, one of my daughters was so mad. She said, "Look, if you lost, okay, I can understand you losing. But this stuff where they're trying to win through the courts, she was furious." And that's what I think people want. People want to know that it's fair, right? And so I think that's what they want.
You're making the point that Donald Trump tried to win through the courts after he lost?
Well, I think you have a right. I think everybody's got a right, just like in what happened in my case with Bill Nelson. You have a right. I'm fine. Okay. You have a right to go, right? But that's it. That's all you have. You don't have a right to guarantee success, right?
All right.
We were ready to defend our case.
To your
I
right,
think it's important.
Juliana Schäuble from Der Tagesspiegel.
And Mark, so we're doing by the way, we're doing the same thing now at the NRSC. So what we're doing there is we're working with lawyers all across the country. So and we're training volunteers. So if we believe that somebody's doing the wrong thing, we're going to be ready. And I think that's good for everybody.
All right, Juliana.
Hi.
Thank you for doing this. But speaking of accepting election results, the Republican Party in Texas does not accept the result of the 2020 election. They have it in their platform. So do you talk to each other? Do you try to find consensus on this? And my second question would be, would you...
I've not talked to them. Every state party has a right to make any decision they want. So what my focus is to make sure we don't have a Senate race in Texas, but where we have Senate races, I do everything I can to help our candidates either be ready for the election or raise money for their elections. That's my role as the NRSC chair.
I'm just saying, when you say many people are worried about the election outcome, about the security, if your own party enlarges this worries, that might be the... That's
a decision they can make. Now, let me ask you, how many times did people ask any of the Democrats about Stacey Abrams not accepting her election? I mean, let's all be honest. There's people that, for whatever reason, they're not comfortable that they lost. And you have a right to go use all your legal resources, okay? But we ought to let's make sure we're all, we're asking everybody the same thing, because I never read any articles that say that people are asking, all Democrats what Stacey Abrams said. And she still doesn't believe she lost.
All right.
Can I get one quick?
Sure, quickly.
Just a question about DeSantis and Trump. Do you think it would be good for the party if both of the candidates would run and the better wins, or do you think DeSantis should not run if Trump would run?
It's 24. I'm going to focus on 22.
All right, Alex from McClatchy.
Senator, you mentioned that I think you talk to Trump every couple of weeks. Have you talked to him at all about Eric Greitens?
I've talked to him about almost every race. My advice, that, as you know, is not something he probably does all the time, is it'd be nice if no one endorsed.
Have you asked him not to endorse?
But I'm not saying just him. I'm saying just let the voters decide. I beat the whole establishment when I ran in 18. So
what did he say to that? When you give that advice, what does he say?
As you know, he does.
Do you think he could still endorse Eric Greitens between now and the primary?
Oh, I don't know.
Just on a different subject, what is your reaction to the reported proposal from the president for a federal gas tax holiday?
No, I mean, look, I think the Democrats realize they're in deep trouble. They've caused these gas prices to go up, and their policies have been horrible. I think that, it's just like releasing from the Federal Reserve gas from the Federal Reserve. It has very little impact, but it's a good political.
Would you still support it, even
if you cut the cost? We have the gas to pay for things, and so if you're going to cut the gas tax, then you're going to have to cut what it's going to be spent for. This is not like there's no impact here. If you cut revenues, you got to cut expenses.
I understand you have concerns kind of broadly with the proposal, but at the end of the day, do you think you would vote to suspend a federal gas tax?
No one's asked me, but I'd probably tie it to are you going to cut the cost the same way?
Could you explain that just a little bit more?
Well, the gas tax like in Florida, our gas tax goes to build roads, bridges, airports, and seaports. So if you're going to cut the gas tax, so the federal revenue, we're not going to get federal revenues for the gas tax, what expenses are we going to cut out?
Okay.
I'm sorry, I didn't explain it well.
And if the gas tax is suspended, is it going to be hard to bring it back?
Oh, I think anything. I think anything you suspend, it's always harder, right? Free sounds pretty good, right? So I put out a bill yesterday that I think people ought to go back to work. I think if you're able-bodied and you don't have young children at home or disabled dependent, I think you ought to get back to work. And so they waived that in 2020 on the food stamps. I think that we ought to get people back to work. And I think. But you're right. There's probably lots of examples where people don't ever want to go back and do what the law was. Because
that's where our infrastructure funding comes from. So yeah. Caitlin Huey-Burns from CBS.
Hi.
We are waiting for a Supreme Court decision on abortion rights. Is this something that Republican candidates are going to be running on? Do you think they should be running on the idea that Roe is likely to be overturned?
So I'm pro-life. I completely disagree with where the Democrats are, where they want to be able to have abortion up until birth, and then you don't have to keep the baby alive, and Catholic workers all have to perform abortions, and we all pay for abortions. So I don't agree with them. I believe the country cherishes life. So I think every candidate will make a choice. You know, we put out some at the NRSC. We had done some polling to show people where the public is. The public is, you know, they believe there ought to be reasonable restrictions and reasonable exceptions, and they completely reject where the Democrats are.
On that note, since you're in the Senate, I mean, do you think that if Roe is overturned, should Republicans be pushing policies that would help women or families after they give birth? In other words, you know, if Republicans are the pro-life party, you know, they've been criticized for a lot of policies, especially in the states, that don't support families. Do you think that Republicans should be talking about some of those measures or what they would do to help women who will likely have to bring children to term?
I think we ought to do everything we can to help families. I think we ought to, you know, try to help promote adoption as an alternative. I think we ought to do everything we can to bring life into the world. Now, you know, I think that sounds really good. Right now, you got to figure out how do you do it in a manner that you can pay for it and can afford it and it's logical. So I think, but the concept of helping build families, I think, is important.
Things like, you know, a child care tax credit or you know, different kinds of incentives or tax breaks to help families?
I think anything we can do to, I think, not anything, but I think we ought to be doing things to help promote families. I think it's a basic way we bring, you know, good people up in this country, and so I think we ought to be supporting family, and we ought to quit, you know, giving people an incentive not to be married. That's their choice. But
so on the abortion law that Governor DeSantis just signed, are you happy with that 15 weeks, or should it have been more like the Texas law?
I mean, I think every state's going to want to do it a little bit differently. I'm fine with 15 weeks.
As a pro-life person, that means somebody up to 15 weeks of pregnancy can.
Well, I mean, look, I'd rather somebody, you know, have the baby and it be if they can't take care of it, it'd be adopted. That's what my goal would be, right? Mm-hmm. But I believe there ought to be. I think there ought to be reasonable exceptions and reasonable restrictions.
Exceptions which aren't
Rape
in the abortion law, right? No exception for rape and incest.
I believe there ought to be exceptions.
There should be. Okay. Gary Martin from Las Vegas Review-Journal.
Senator, Adam Laxalt back in Nevada has given a couple interviews where he says that unlike waiting until after the 2020 election to challenge results that they did in that the Trump campaign did, that he's still going to be proactive in filing lawsuits before balloting is closed while the process is ongoing. And he's also said that he wants to try to get NRCSC to pay for some of that. So I guess my question to you is, you know, how much involvement is NRSC in Laxalt's plan to file lawsuits challenging voting in Nevada before the elections end or the balloting quits? And to what extent NRSC can fund it?
So I don't know anything about filing any lawsuits ahead of time. So no one's brought anything up to me. So I don't think so. I don't know of any. I do believe if you find that people are violating the law, if you can't get, and every state's organized a little bit different, but in Florida as an example, if the supervisor election is doing the wrong thing and you can't get them to do the right thing, then you have to go to the courts. So I completely agree with that, and that's one of the reasons why what we're doing is we're organizing lawyers around the country to make sure that we watch how these are done. But it comes down to candidates got to do their job. All their volunteers have got to, you got to show up and monitor these supervisor elections. But if you can't get them to do their job, then the court is a resort.
What's the top pickup state you think?
I think the four logical ones are Georgia, Nevada, Arizona, and New Hampshire. But we got it. But we have an unbelievable candidate already in the state of Washington, Tiffany Smiley. We've got great people running in New Hampshire and Arizona. So I think Colorado. But those are the logical four. But I think there might be more. I think this is going to. I mean, look, I've been doing this for 12 years, so I'm not an expert on elections, but I mean, Biden's agenda is pretty unpopular, and he's unpopular.
All right. I'm sorry, what's your name?
Sam Brody with the Daily
Oh,
Beast.
Sam Brody, Daily Beast.
I wanted to go back to Georgia, and you said a couple moments ago that, Herschel Walker has been transparent and honest about aspects of his record, and certainly he's been candid about some, but I can think of a couple areas in which he has not really been forthcoming about aspects of his past and his background, revelations about his business record, children that he was not talking about publicly. So I wanted to ask you if there was a failure by Republicans to adequately vet Herschel Walker before he became the nominee.
Sam, I'm not an expert on everything that's come out down there, but the way I've heard it is, I mean, no one hid anything. It's just not something people talked about. But I think that every candidate has to be transparent. Every voter needs to have good information, and I think ultimately the voters will make a choice. And it's not a choice for the NRSC. It's a choice to the voters in Georgia get to pick who they want.
Right, but in covering the primary down there, some of Herschel Walker's rivals in the Republican primary made this kind of very argument that he was, coasting to the nomination with Trump's endorsement. There wasn't adequate scrutiny on him, and that were he to win the nomination, things like this would come out and damage his reputation before it was, he would already be on the ballot. Did you have any concerns like that during the primary?
No, I mean, I think Herschel's going to be a good candidate. He'll run a good race. I think you guys know what races are like. I mean, there's always going to be, everybody's some truthful, some not truthful, right? People are going to be accused of things, and the voters are going to make a choice, and the voters of Georgia will make a choice. I think Herschel's going to win. He's ahead if you look at right now, he's leading in I think most of the general election polling that's out there. I think he's going to win, and I think people like Herschel. He's a likable person. He's somebody that presents himself well. And Warnock's issue is that he's voted with Schumer. That's not where Georgia is.
Micah Hart from Newsmax, to your right.
Thank you so much, Senators. My question goes back to the Texas platform the GOP just released down there. What would you say? You said states like Washington and Connecticut, which are known to be, they vote for Biden. I mean, what would you say that how does the Republican Party pull in voters then in states like that where they're seeing a platform in Texas which is much further right than they may be used to and maybe concerned about within the overall Republican Party?
I think take the state of Washington. I mean, they're going to make a choice between Tiffany Smiley and Patty Murray, and they're going to. I mean, I think that it depends on who runs the best race, and it's an election about. Take Washington. It's going to be an election about what they want, who they want to go represent them in Washington. I don't think they're going to be spending all their time talking about something that's happening in another state. I think they're going to talk about gas prices, food prices, baby formula shortages, teaching your kids critical race theory, defunding the police. I mean, I think that's what the election's going to be about.
All right, Kate Ackley from Roll Call.
Thank you. Last night there was a primary, a Republican Senate primary in Alabama. Members of the Senate, current Republicans in the Senate, were split on some endorsed Katie Britt and some endorsed Mo Brooks. What was your takeaway from last night? Any thoughts on?
Katie ran a good race. I mean, if you look at that primary, different people were up at different times, and Katie, she ran a good primary and won. I think she's going to be a very good U.S. senator. I think she's reflecting what people in Alabama care about. So,
what did you make of the kind of changes in Trump's endorsement? Did you think it was a factor at all in her win or Brooks' loss, or what was did you have any takeaway from that?
I haven't seen a poll on that, on how much, now, and who knows how accurate that would be anyway if somebody did a poll, but I mean, I'm sure Trump is happy that Katie won since he endorsed her.
All right, Jill Colvin from the AP, to your right.
Just following up on the Texas platform, I just wanted to sort of drill a little bit deeper there, because in addition to calling Trump or Biden an acting president, it also specifically describes homosexuality as, quote, an abnormal lifestyle choice. And that kind of language is something that, you know, we've seen in other corners of the party, and that really seems to kind of go in a very different direction from where Trump was during his years in office. And so I'm wondering, do you worry that that kind of language and that kind of embrace of sort of more conservative social values is going to be problematic for the party going forward?
My experience is, you know, the Republican Party is inclusive, so I wouldn't have supported that, what they did. So
the Republican Party is inclusive. You wouldn't describe that language, I imagine, as inclusive?
No.
And kind of, do you have sort of a message then for, you know, people who are working on these kinds of things, for candidates out there, for as you're looking to grow the party?
I think every candidate, in my role, what I try to do is I don't tell people what they ought to run on. I give them information about. We do a lot of polls. You can go. We put them up online at nrsc.org. We show people where the public is, but in every state's got different issues, and they ought to run on the issues that are important to them. I can tell you, I won in 2010 because my opponent didn't talk about the economy, and I did. I had a plan to change the job market in Florida. He didn't, and that's how I won. And so it wasn't what somebody was saying in some other state. It was I talked about what was important to the people of Florida in 2010. In 2022, there's going to be different issues. Like in my state in 2018, offshore drilling was a big issue. In Iowa, it probably doesn't matter.
To your left, Krista Case Bryant from the Christian Science Monitor.
So the January 6th committee has said that part of the reason for why they're holding these hearings is because they want to prevent a January 6th style attack from ever happening again. And I'm just curious, from your viewpoint, to what extent, I mean, what do you see as the main factors that led to January 6th, and to what extent are they still present within the Republican base?
Well, first off, if they actually wanted to do something, they would have had a normally organized committee to do it, and they didn't. I mean, the way Pelosi set that up, I mean, it's tainted from the time it started. So I don't think it's legitimate that she was trying to do anything other than taint Republicans. What happened on January 6th, I was there. It was disgusting that people broke into the Capitol. They should never be breaking into the Capitol. They ought to be, the FBI is doing their job, as far as I can tell. I mean, they're prosecuting people who broke into the Capitol, and so and I think there were two committees, Rules and Homeland Security, I think it was. We did hearings about the things that we need to change in the Capitol security, and I think those changes are being made to make it safer. But it's disgusting. People should never be breaking into the Capitol. They shouldn't be breaking into anything. So, and they ought to be prosecuted, and it ought to be consistent. I mean, this idea. It was disgusting to me is, they're trying to burn down the building out in Portland, and Democrats go out and don't let these people prosecuted. No, if you break the law, you should be prosecuted. Period. That's what. When I became governor of Florida, what surprised me is that people just didn't enforce the law. I said, I thought we all had to try to comply with the law to the best we could. So.
I guess, sorry. I can follow up after you.
Just going to a question of prosecution. Trump recently said that he's seriously considering pardoning people who were involved in January 6th. Are you comfortable with that notion?
I didn't see that. They said that, but I think if you violate the law, you violated the law. I wouldn't. No.
And what about?
So I did clemency cases, and the way I always looked at clemency cases, it was clemency based on a change in how you. It wasn't the way I looked at it was. I told people when they came in, I said, don't litigate why you were prosecuted. Tell me how you changed.
This is a rallying cry, literally a rallying cry. He gets the crowd riled up by saying, I'm very seriously considering pardoning people who were involved in the January 6th.
Yeah, that's not the way I would look at it's a clemency process. pardoning is a clemency process.
Krista, did you want to follow
At least
up?
that's the way I did 100 cases about every 90 days, and that's the way I looked at it in my cases.
I guess I was talking a little bit more big picture about, what brought people out on the 6th in the first place, why so many people came to Trump's rally, what they were frustrated about, and obviously there's a portion of those people who engaged in illegal activity and broke into the Capitol, but there were a lot more people behind that who shared the same grievances, it seems like, and whether it was, the rapid changes in election laws leading up to 2020, or the way that the media portrays Trump supporters and the grievances that engendered or exacerbated. In my reporting, I've just heard a lot of different reasons for what brought people out, and I'm wondering to what extent you feel like the committee has reflected an understanding of those things and addressed those sorts of factors that could lead to more political violence, or is there a risk that these hearings, which are ostensibly meant to prevent another such attack, could actually rile up people further, or are they just not paying attention?
I think they just made it worse. I mean, I think people would be happy with a legitimate review of what goes on in everything. I'm on the Homeland Security Committee. I mean, I think people would like us to review, like, as an example, why is the border open? We ought to do that, right? But we don't. So I've been up here 3.5 years, and what I see all the time is it's all about having a message for the next election rather than actually solving problems. If they cared about January 6th, they actually really cared, okay, then they would have a legitimate committee that would do legitimate oversight. They're not.
But you didn't want a bipartisan commission.
As long
You didn't want an independent bipartisan commission, right?
Well, first off, we already had 2 committees that were doing it, so you don't need another one. And by the way, I'm okay with things as long as it's set up fairly. I mean, I'd have to pick which one.
The independent commission.
Because it was not set up the way prior commissions have been set up. I can go back through the details, but it still was set up to where one party controlled for the witnesses and things like that. I'll get you the information, but that's why I voted against it.
All right, Stephen Dennis from Bloomberg.
Senator Scott, you did come under some bipartisan fire when you came out with your plan. You have a revised plan. There's sort of a big split between you and McConnell over just sort of how specific you were, and particularly the 2 things that he didn't like was the proposal that everybody pay at least some income tax, which I think you said could be a few dollars for some people, and the other one was sunsetting all federal laws, and he talked about that as we're not going to do that if I'm in charge. We're not going to be sunsetting Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. I'm wondering sort of how you processed the blowback from that inside your own party and sort of navigated that, and do you have any regrets over anything that you put in that original plan, given that now the Democrats are at least trying to run against that and saying, hey, Republicans have a plan to raise your taxes and eliminate things you care about, like Medicare and Social Security?
But it's first off, I assume the Democrats don't like what I put out, because I actually believe in accountability and they don't. I believe in people working, and they're trying to get people not to work. But look, there's people that don't believe we ought to run on a plan. I do. I'm a business guy. I believe we ought to have a plan, and I believe we ought to fight over what's in it. I'm fine with saying, so if somebody else has a better idea, let's have a conversation about it. But I believe we're going to get a majority. When we get a majority, what are we going to do? Because if we're not going to do anything, why elect us? And so I believe that people ought to get back to work. If you go back to work, you actually pay taxes. I'll put up my tax cutting record against anybody's, and fee cutting record against anybody's in the Senate. I've never supported tax increases or fee increases. Actually, I cut them 100 times when I was governor of Florida. But I do believe that if you're able-bodied, you ought to go back to work. You pay payroll taxes and income taxes, and you buy things. You pay sales tax. You buy a house. You pay property tax. That's why I think that's how this country was made. I mean, my mom would never ever have allowed us to say, "Oh, let me see if there's another government program I can go on," rather than going to get a job. I think that what the Democrats have done is they've set up a system where people are spending more time looking at and find another government program rather than another job. So, but I believe in what I put out, and I've been clear about why I believe it. And by the way, people are disingenuous when they want to say that I wanted to reduce, do anything to hurt Medicare and Social Security. First, Biden's voted to do that. He supported that. On top of that, that would suggest we ought to have just permanent funding for every program that we have in the federal government, which we don't, including the most important program, which is their defense budget. We do that every year. I just did it.
I mean, the thing with McConnell is he basically said we're not going to do your plan, but there is sort of an unclear. He's talked about sort of a agenda with topics, border, inflation, etc. But as far as like having a plan to actually do what you've wanted to do and have talked about, even when Republicans were in charge, you were not happy with Republicans not controlling spending, with Republicans not taking on entitlements. Are you comfortable with Mitch McConnell's leadership? Will you support him? And do you think that this Republican new majority, would be prepared to take some tough votes on things like controlling entitlements that you think would need to be done to control inflation, balance the budget, et cetera?
I'm not going to reduce the benefits on Social Security and Medicare, but I think we have to figure out how to live within our means. We have to be honest with the American public. I mean, we're running $1 trillion deficits every year. I mean, look, why do we have inflation? It's pretty simple. I mean, we have excess spending in every area, it seems like, in this country almost. I mean, I walked in with a budget. My state had only balanced its budget one time in the 40 years before I got elected. 1 year, right? I balanced the budget. I cut taxes and fees, and we had record funding for things because we grew the economy. What we've got to figure out is, how do we grow this economy? Part of it is get everybody back to work. That can work. If you're able-bodied, get bact to work. We'll start growing our economy again, and when they do, we'll have more revenues to invest where we want. But this idea that we can just keep borrowing money, inflation is not going away if we keep doing this. If we keep having excessive spending, and we have a Federal Reserve that continues to keep a $9 trillion balance sheet, I mean, I don't see how inflation is going away.
I do feel like the Republican Party, they had a chance. They had control of government for 2 years, and they increased spending and cut taxes, and the deficit went up even before COVID. They didn't pass the ACA overhaul. They didn't do a lot of things that, I remember seeing Paul Ryan's charts for years after years. Here's what you do with, this entitlement or that entitlement. You can actually balance the budget. And they kind of drop-kicked that into the sun in 2017 and didn't do any of that. I mean, it just seems like you're putting out a plan that, is trying to do something on this stuff, and you got an instant blowback. And it just, Do you think the Republican Party has a credibility problem on this issue of balancing the budget, doing the stuff that you did in Florida?
I think the public is going to demand it. So I think the public is going to demand accountability in government, and so it's going to happen. I don't know when it's going to happen, but the public is fed up with this inflation, and the public is smart. I mean, my adopted dad has sixth-grade education. He didn't have a lot of education, but he was no dummy. He didn't like earmark. This idea that we just going to waste money, he would never have allowed that. And he was a Democrat.
I don't think I heard you say that you would support McConnell again.
Well, there'll be election, so I think we have an election right after.
Are you undecided on how you would handle that, depending on who runs, what you run?
Well, I look right now. I don't know if anybody's going to run against Leader McConnell. He's the leader, so it's a hypothetical.
Is it possible you'll run against him?
I don't have a plan to run.
You don't have a plan to run? Okay.
No. I have a plan to run for the U.S. Senate.
Okay, we have 4 minutes. I've promised to get you out of here right on time. 3 questions. Let's do 1 question each. Matthew Holt from National Journal.
I want to talk a little strategy with the NRSC here. You guys spent $17 million last month, and you've been really aggressive running ads in all these states. Is it a plan to continue that level of spending throughout the rest of the election season?
Yeah, it's all tied to raising money. So, but yeah, we're gonna spend our money. We're gonna define the Democrats as early as we can. That's our plan. So, but we have to keep raising money.
All right.
Every month.
Democrats have built massive war chests. So you're confident that you'll have the resources to compete?
I hope so. I believe we will, but the proof's in the pudding.
All right. Stephanie Lai from the New York Times.
Going back to the gun reform bill, are there specific provisions I know that you think you wouldn't support or you think would violate the Second Amendment? Going back to the gun reform bill, I know you mentioned you haven't fully read the text, but based on the framework, are there provisions that you think you wouldn't support, like right off the bat, or things that you know would violate the Second Amendment?
Well, there's the Luke and Alex School Safety Act, which would codify what Trump started, a national database to tell parents how safe their school is. It's no different than what Jeb did with when he ranked schools, when we started school ranking in Florida, something like that. I believe in that. Already the Secret Service, we have a bill that where the Secret Service already does threat assessment. We would have them put more effort in school safety. So those two things I would for sure support. But I just got the bill last night, so I'm going through it.
That already stands out to you as something you would support?
Those two.
Wouldn't support, sorry.
No, I would support those two provisions, but I'll look at the bill.
All right. Kenneth Doyle from Bloomberg Government.
Hi.
You have contested primaries next week in Colorado and Oklahoma.
Right.
Just wanted to see your thoughts, maybe especially in Colorado, where the two very different candidates. The Democrats have basically intervened to try and elect one of them.
Yeah, we're filing an FEC complaint against the Democrats. They put out some information saying that Chris can explain this better than I can, but basically what they did was they went out and said that one of the candidates was supported by the Republican Party of Colorado, which one was not true, and two, they didn't do the disclosure of who put it out. So it sure looks like they violated the law. So we're filing an FEC complaint now.
Do you think in general that maybe the NRC should have been more proactive in some of these races where now you have the Democrats getting involved to promote some of these more controversial candidates, or what was asked before about some of the ones that are more controversial that seem to be prevailing? Is that should you have done more?
I don't think people want Washington to pick who the candidates are. I think the voters in the states want to pick who's going to represent them.
All right, good. Well, I think we've reached the end of our hour, and I really appreciate your coming, and I hope you'll come again.
Tomorrow I'll get you the information on that, because it's been a while back, so I have to think about why, but I'll get you the information. Chris will get it to you.
Thank you.
Okay.
All right.
Okay, thank you very much. Bye. Bye-bye. Okay. Are you That's a nice town.
Yeah, he gave us things that needed
Here's what's